Hello. Sorry to bother you. Can I ask you a slightly odd question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm making a podcast called Strangers on a Bench, where essentially I talk to people I don't know on benches for 10 or 15 minutes. Are you up for that? Do you want to give it a go? Do you have a favourite day of the week? Drum roll.
I think it's Monday now.
You mean you think it's Monday now, or you think it's Monday?
It used to not be Monday. It used to be probably more like the typical like Friday, Saturday. But then this year I've not been working, and so Mondays is like I drop my son at school and then come for a walk. And so I really enjoy like just some time to myself. So like I was just thinking it has become probably my favourite way to start a week.
Okay, this is very good. How do you spend these Mondays? What's the dream one?
There's a backstory to how my dream has changed for Mondays.
Oh, okay.
So at the start of this year, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it coincided with me knowing I wanted to take a break from work. So thankfully, I had just finished working. So I kind of found myself in between hospital appointments with a lot of stuff going on in my head, and so just started coming for walks on the heath. Someone had told me to like talk to trees, which seemed quite wild at the time.
Right. Who was that? Who told you that?
An amazing kind of body psychologist who does osteo and things. Anyway, so I just started coming to the heath most mornings and just walking or sitting on benches and not really talking to trees, but just looking at trees for a few hours. And ironically, over a few months, kind of what should have maybe been the most tumultuous time in my life, people would ask me how I was, and I was like, I have never been better, because I have just spent 3 months like just walking and no longer living in this crazy kind of other life that I just wasn't in flow with.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's go pre the new life.
Yeah.
What did your Mondays look like before all this?
Pretty manic Monday. So I work in private equity finance, and so quite intense
What is
working
that?
weeks. Private equity specifically is raising billions of money from typically big pension funds, insurance companies, any institutions with lots of money, and investing it for them in owning assets. And the part of my role was facing the investors, and so that meant a lot of travel globally. So it was just a very busy life, and a life where you're always on, and a life with long hours. So a normal Monday morning would be probably Sunday night. I'd already started getting my head back into the to-do list of what I had to do. And then you'll either be in an office all week or be at Heathrow early in the morning getting a flight somewhere for the week. And so I think manic is definitely the way I look back on that part of my life. I just started dreading Mondays and just not liking what I did. And so I decided essentially just need to have a break, both to reset myself physically because I felt burnt out, which is ironic to then get the diagnosis a month later, but also just to question, do I want to stay in this industry? Yeah.
When you say long hours, what are we talking?
Got better as you get older, but in your 20s, you'd be expected to be in the office till after midnight every single day.
Fuck.
And that's still normal
starting
now.
From when?
Oh, like 8 a.m.
What?
Yeah.
But how do you
You get up at
live?
5 a.m. and then exercise before you get to the office, and then you don't have a social life. And then the reset for really me was having a child, and clearly that became the priority for me. And so, the hours became slightly less intense as I kind of balanced it a bit more, but it would normally be working after he's gone down to bed and things like that. And so I genuinely think that was a big contributor to me just burning myself into the ground and probably, getting ill in the way that I did, because I look back and you're like, it's like a crazy way for humans to exist or to live.
How aware were you of how crazy it was during the craziness?
I don't think you have a lot of perspective, and actually I worked with a kind of career coach as I was thinking of leaving. And she said it to me, it's kind of like how you cook frogs. You know, you put them in water and you slowly turn up the temperature and turn it up so they don't realise that they're boiling. Like that visual for me, it's like, that's it. Because you lose your sense of normal, and I think in those organisations particularly it works for them, for people to kind of make work their life and to give so much of themselves. And unless you really have a strong community outside of industry, or you have other people who can kind of say to you, hey, no, this isn't normal, you know, I think you do just keep going and going. And when I chose to resign, the number of people who were like, well, that's just crazy. Why would you leave without a job? Why would you leave this job that pays a lot? You know, why wouldn't you stay for another 5 years and wait to make this amount of millions and things? And that's how they kind of justify it to themselves. I guess it's the nature of capitalism more generally in lots and lots of industries. But I think more people are questioning it, but a lot of people, unfortunately, are still kind of stuck in the system.
I mean, everything is a cult, really, isn't it?
It is.
They're everywhere.
Yeah. I used to work at Goldman's and...
Quick question.
Yes.
Just for people who won't know, what is Goldman's?
Oh, Goldman's Sachs is one of the largest kind of global investment banks in the world. And so I was working for them in New Zealand. And when I left there, it felt like leaving a cult. You know, they really want you to believe it's the only place to work, and that's how they kind of keep people. Yeah.
So this life coach was a game changer for you.
Yeah, she, you know, said to me, "Why wouldn't you just leave your job?" And it was literally like a bomb drop, because I was like, "That just sounds crazy," because I think again, your identity becomes your work, or you think your identity is your work.
Yeah.
And so I spent several months with her, and I got to the point, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is just a part of my life. I should just leave this job. And so essentially over the space of 6 months, I kind of agreed with my work to leave and left at the end of the year. So I was not working. I was in that phase of just exploring what I wanted to do next when I found a lump in my breast and was diagnosed with breast cancer. But that's the ironic thing. My husband said it to me, my brother said it to me. It's like all those things that you actually kind of knew in your gut last year, you needed to slow down. The universe was just making sure you really got the lesson and didn't just race back into the next job still and kind of like chase your ego a bit. And weirdly, and that's what, so I say to people, it's like, it was the most amazing gift, because it is actually exactly what I needed in that moment.
I'm guessing though you weren't thinking amazing gift when you were diagnosed.
Not in the first few weeks when you don't know if it's terminal or not. Yeah, and I lost a very good friend who was a few years younger than me to cancer, and so in the first few weeks my mind goes to the extreme and I'm like, well, I'm going to die. And then I think slowly as you digest and you realise what your treatment plans are, and I could see a life beyond it again.
What has emerged from yourself during, I'm thinking back to what you're saying about working till midnight and getting up at 5 a.m, all this stuff, and to cultivate an identity is quite difficult beyond your work, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what has emerged from yourself during the quiet times? Or what was lurking beneath that wasn't allowed to get out?
Yeah. Do you know what I think it is? It's like stripping away everything to realise that your identity is actually just you without all the external things. And actually just time with family and son, being like, this is enough. You know, because I think actually when I was grappling with, you know, okay, I'll stop my job and then what do I do next? I was still in the mindset of like, whatever I do is my identity, rather than actually just being. The old, like, you know, we're not human doings, we're human beings, I think was the thing that really landed for me. It was like, I don't need an identity that is anything external other than just being here and being present. And I think it's stripping back everything that over the years you feel, you know, you need to buy or you need to achieve to kind of be worthy or to have an identity, whereas actually just kind of how we land on this planet in the way that we are with people is all that really matters. Yeah.
I really like that. Talk to me about talking to trees, because well, it was funny as you were talking then about identity, and I was thinking, like, she's right. We pile these things on top of ourselves that are actually not really anything. I was thinking, when you think about it, like, you know, how different are we from a tree? You know, in a way, you know, I said that's what I was thinking. Talking to a tree is almost like, well, that's like what we are in a way. Yeah,
so that's kind of how my journey went, is talking to trees. Is this therapist I've seen. Funny enough, I went in to see him last year before I got diagnosed. And I said to him, I'm really happy, I'm about to get married. And he could see it. He's like, yeah, but you're still wired. Like, you're supercharged right now. And I could feel it in myself, like being really, really kind of highly strung. And he was like, you know, you're not meant to move at this speed. And so he kind of said, just go watch the trees and watch how slowly trees move. Everything in the universe should be operating more at that frequency. You know, if you watch nature, it's kind of moving at the frequency that we should be moving at. And so that's what I started doing. And I did find actually I would just the pace of my walking, you know, I'd really start ambling through the heath rather than power walking and thinking about steps. And that was, you know, it really helped. And then I was saying to him, well, in the moments of anxiety or if I'm feeling stressed again, I can't quite put my finger on like what it might be. So he was like, well, just ask the trees and start talking to the trees. I was like, that's kind of crazy. But then it does work, kind of allowing your subconscious to answer things for you rather than just always being in your mind.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it is, you know, you need to kind of lose the shame element because, you know, if you're walking around sometimes like talking or hugging a tree, like, you just need to lean into it and trust that there's enough other weirdos out there that will get it.
Just got to do it. I'm quite a fan of hugging trees. I think you do kind of feel something.
Yeah.
You know?
The first time I ever did it was when I was pregnant with my son and he was overdue and I was beginning to get really anxious about it. And I just said to my husband, I was like, we need to go to the heath and I'm going to hug some trees. And it was the first time I've ever done it. But it worked. He came like that night.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, you say that it's, even now, you say me talking to trees and looking at trees, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You know? You've also said that, rightly, that working till midnight for Gary is also crazy.
Yeah. I think it's that conditioning, isn't it, of our society. And actually, from very early on in my life, I was really interested in like Eastern medicine, but it's even that awareness of the West. We're very conditioned to things which have kind of been scientifically or, you know, like accepted by society or normalised since the Industrial Revolution, the last only 100 or so years, is what's normal. And then anything that is slightly alternative to that is, you kind of have to disclaim it in a way, don't you? Yeah.
I had a thought as you were talking about steps as well. And, you know, I'm so guilty of this, but it's like, again, a way to measure ourselves against ourselves and others.
Yes.
So-and-so does 20,000 a day or so-and-so, you know, whatever it is. And actually what's important is, you know, maybe one step of those is the key step.
Yes.
The step that you took to go towards that tree, to talk to that tree, was the thing. But you can't measure that.
Yeah.
Is there one particular tree, by the way, that you talked to that you felt gave you the most whatever?
There is one particular tree that I walk along and
what
I
is
really
it,
like.
What is it about that tree?
It looks slightly dead, but then it comes to
Oh, that's interesting. You chose a dead tree.
Yeah, and it really appeals to me because it's just like it looks resilient or something, and it has like sparks of life on it, but equally
wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's in a pocket that is kind of by itself. And
how long could you spend with this particular favourite tree?
I can sometimes sit there for like an hour, but I often like take my notebook and journal, which is another thing that I'd never done before, but sometimes I'll just sit there next to it and just write and write and write and write, or leave voice notes, like particularly coming into like surgeries for this year, being nervous and worried about my son, I'll just leave him like lots of voice notes and things. And so I think it's been like a space that's kind of held me.
What kind of voice notes do you leave for your son? As in...
The slightly morbid, like, if anything went wrong in the surgery, these are all the things I want you to know.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. And does your son get them, like, is it for the future?
No,
He gets
I
them
send
now?
them to my best friend, and
Oh,
I
I
say,
see.
if anything goes wrong in the surgery,
whoa.
here's all my voice notes.
Well,
He's
that's
only 5, so
okay, fine.
I think
I
that'd
was
be a bit...
like, poor kid, he comes home, he's got 20 voice notes from mum going, if I die, remember this.
It's more all the stuff I just couldn't say to him now, because he's like, actually the gift of him being 5 is he has no idea what cancer is. And so in his head there is no concept that mum doesn't get better, which has been such a gift going through it all.
But have you found yourself saying anything in those voice notes that surprised you? Like what, did anything come out? Like, why have I said that?
A lot of the things that we were talking about your worth kind of being just who you are. And don't feel like you need to live your life aspiring to be anyone else or to do anything. Like that is the one of the gifts of working in, finance and being ridiculously rewarded is, I think, actually, that kind of privilege that my son doesn't need to worry so much about money, and he can actually choose something that he's passionate about rather than just kind of following the system. Then, I think that'd be one of the biggest gifts we could give him.
Can I ask you some difficult questions about money? I'm interested in money. I'll start with some gentle ones, but money must have been quite a big driving factor in your life at early doors. I mean, to work till midnight.
I think I was driven more by the worth thing. Like,
Okay.
I always loved numbers from very little, but actually money wasn't the motivator. Like, I was kind of surprised by what people earned. It was more, I want to get to the top of this industry, and by nature you actually make a lot of money.
see.
So I'm one of the few people in our organisation who will argue with my colleagues that we should be paying a lot of tax. I think what people in finance earn is stupid money. And leaving my job last year, talking to people in the industry who'd say, I would love to leave my job, but I could never give up the money. Actually, I'd reached that point that I was like, I don't care about the money. And I think that gave me the freedom to
so it's kind
choose
of
to
important that
take
you
the
had
break.
that quality in the first place.
Yeah.
How do you feel about money now? Has that changed at all?
I think I've recognised that there's still a level of like lifestyle, etc., that I need to work. Like part of my not working was, wow, could I just do something completely different? And I realised actually, no, I probably do need to go back to work and continue to earn, because you live in London, you have a certain, there's certain cost of living. But I definitely became very clear, and as I started looking at new opportunities, the one thing that's going to be important is culture. And so I gave up quite significantly more lucrative options because actually I just knew the culture wasn't going to be a fit. So I feel quite clear now, about its importance in my
Is that
life.
going to be tricky to obviously you've had this dive into a new world that's kind of been forced upon you.
Yeah.
Is it going to be quite hard to, I don't know, it's hard to turn off our own kind of instinctive competition element of ourselves.
Yeah.
Kind of, you're back into work and you're like, oh God, this is surely this is what...
I've defaulted.
Yeah, this is what got me into trouble in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Knowing...
That has been my biggest fear, and I've had this creeping anxiety over this, few months have been like, I've never been so present, I've never been so calm. Is it all going to come crashing down as soon as I step back into an office? And, there's still a little bit of doubt, but I think the thing that makes me a little bit more confident about actually kind of going back into, frankly, finance a different way is kind of practices and, just things that I'm doing that actually I think I just feel a lot more grounded. And I think so long as I continue to do those, like getting out into nature, and I get up earlier now, and I kind of, if it's breathwork, meditation or Kundalini, I kind of have been quite committedly doing quite a few things that I think already set me up in a different state. And then I think the last thing is, finance is quite a masculine industry. One, there are a lot of men, in particular when I started. It's getting better, but at senior levels there still are. And I think the last job I was in, I frankly kind of lost touch of my feminine, kind of to survive. You just take on a lot of that kind of slightly aggro, egotistical culture and absorb it into you. And actually, when I said, culture is important, I deliberately focused on firms where I felt that wasn't so prevalent. But also, I've been quite clear about the type of person I want to be in the firm. Coming with family and actually being able to be a bit more authentically me.
Yeah. Are there any all-female practices or firms, are they called?
Not at all.
Can you start one?
Talked about it with other females in the industry.
Oh God, you could do it. How hard could it be? Just get together and say, let's do it.
Yeah.
You see, you've already talked about it.
Yeah, we have.
What's stopping you? Come on, sort it out. You can do it. You've come this far.
We could. Do you know what I think it also is, though? Is it's the point about work suddenly not being your life. And I think a lot of other females reach that realisation, and it's actually anything entrepreneurial, kind of in this chapter right now while my son is young, it's I kind of want to do it, but it doesn't feel like right now. Because what I have realised this year is actually that is much more important than anything I'm doing work-wise again.
Sure. I don't have that many finance gurus on the bench. What guru? Maybe this is unfair. Do you think it has a kind of bad, finance is a bit of a bad rep generally if you don't work in finance? Is that fair?
I think it does. My husband and I met on Tinder, which I have to say it was like when it was first released and not, I think, what it is now.
Early
It's
Tinder.
when you're looking for relationships. And he works more in like social impact consulting, and on our first date he made a comment about bankers being essentially the devil. And I had to break it to him that I had been an investment banker and I worked in finance. And, you know, it was one of those things where he would have never have gone on a date with me if he knew.
If you led with that.
Yeah, and he,
Does that
to
mean-
his credit, he was able to look through it. And to my credit, I was able to win him over that we're not all that bad. But it's true. I think there is, and actually because particularly, you know, in the areas that he worked, you look at the global financial crisis and how much I think the finance industry has created inequality in society. You know, I do think, I find it really triggering. I think probably because also being through the healthcare system is like, how can people who sit behind desks and just create paper wealth earn so much more than people who are bringing real value like nurses and doctors and people like that? I just think something's broken with society, and I think unfortunately the kind of finance industry does have a loud voice into government and people who influence. And so weirdly, even though I'm on the inside of it, you know, there's a lot of parts that I see, and I think it's kind of fair that there's that attention that has come towards the sector. But, you know, as my husband says to me, it's like, yeah, but you can kind of fight for the good model of finance whilst you're on the inside rather than just leave it, you know. And so there is a lot of investment that particularly private equity can bring to lots of companies, etc., that government doesn't have the money to bring and to reinvest in things, you know. And there's virtues, but I think it should be kind of regulated. I think there should be more equality with taxes. Yeah, I'd say I'm probably one of the few on the inside who thinks
that's interesting.
yeah.
So you're kind of aware of the kind of the darker sides of it.
Yeah. There's good people within it, but I think unfortunately it's part of a system that isn't necessarily great for the whole of, you know, society.
Can you tell me what the the darkest thing that you've seen inside a? This is a good one. Something must have happened at 11:30 at night. What are the truly dark bits that you've seen during your time?
I'm trying to think. I've probably pushed it so far to the back of my mind. It kind of to that normalised point again, you know, like it becomes so normalised that nothing stands out. I'm trying to think.
You know, this is the
Well,
same
so
as
one that was not in my office, but I heard in one of the other offices like when I first came to London, is people having like cocaine in the salt shaker to literally keep people going, and it was just completely normal.
Yeah.
So definitely some, you know, like stories like that where you're like, this is just wrong and weird. Yeah.
There must be people that fall apart.
Yeah. You know.
You must have seen that.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just keep it to themselves.
I think keep it to themselves.
Do you keep? Here's a question. We could say that you fell apart. Is that fair? To an extent.
Yeah, I think my body fell apart. I think my nature is to be resilient and kind of push through and not complain.
Yeah.
And, you know, see that as a virtue. And so I think I probably fell apart on the inside while trying to like hold it together. Yeah.
I suppose the question is, to what extent do your former colleagues know about what's happened to you and how you feel about it? Do you know what I mean? Like, how communicative have you been about your story?
I've been quite open because I think in terms of if I'm going to stay in this industry, I want to change, or at least the way that I work, and be more authentic and not play the game. I kind of have a platform in that I set up a foundation for the industry to give more to charity because, you know, in terms of we in finance make a lot of money, we need to give more back. That was actually like one of my ways, I guess, of trying to bring that more to the fore.
That's cool.
So, yeah, I have been pretty open about it.
Yeah.
Even in taking this long off, and it was announced last week that I was coming back because, like I said, I've taken a long break because of cancer.
How was it announced?
Oh, just in media releases and things.
Really?
And so,
well, like a big announcement.
Yeah.
Are you a real
Not
big
that
dog?
Important, no.
Oh,
I was as shocked that they were even interested in writing it up.
What was the headline? Stranger X coming back, watch out.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so it was quite important to say, like, I've had a long break because of cancer, you know, and a bit of a curveball.
Yeah. I suppose it's too much responsibility to put on just your shoulders, but
Yeah.
do you have an interest in kind of saving people from what you've had to go through?
Yeah. It did suddenly come to me, I think probably while I was talking to a tree, about whether I go back into finance or not. It's like, actually, if you do, this is one of the things. Show younger women how they don't need to give up their soul, or they don't need to kind of give up their identity to stay in this industry. That's my way of kind of passing on the learnings of it all.
I was just laughing there because I was just imagining you talking to a tree about whether you should go back into finance.
Yeah.
Probably,
The tree's like, no.
The tree's probably not saying, yeah, I would go right back into that financial world, actually. That's my first thing I would do. Actually, this is quite a good one. Actually, you kind of know what a tree would say. I once ran a half marathon for a charity called Trees for Cities, something like that. It was a tree charity. And I asked a friend of my mum's, who's sadly no longer with us, if he would donate. And he's a big trees fan. And for whatever reason, this email, he just said, you know what, I've got a feeling that if you just gave trees machine guns, they would just kill everyone. That's always stayed with me.
That's awesome. Well, like similar, like my therapist always says, like the trees are watching us thinking you guys are just batshit crazy, like rushing about, because they were like, if you think of yourself as being tree speed and then they watch you are like these crazy little ants like racing around the heath, and
like,
they're
what
just
idiots?
like looking at you like you're idiots. And it really helped.
You're like, should I go back into finance? Instant death.
Yeah, instant death.
Maybe you can have a kind of tree-based firm where they just, one day a week you all just spend time working amongst the trees.
Well, do you know what? Like, that's kind of the philosophy of my son's school, is that kids will do much better work. Like, they say for boys particularly, like, they'll come out and teach maths amongst the trees and things because it's a lot easier for them to focus and to sit down and actually engage with things. So you've got an idea there. Like, why does it change when you reach a certain age?
It just doesn't, does it?
Yeah. We've just been told to go sit in these boxes and offices.
I feel like you've got it in you to do something a bit funky.
Really.
Especially if you're this big dog who's being announced, and all these things. They get the trumpets out to announce your arrival back into work. It's pretty mega. Let's dive back a bit, if we can, into, I'm interested how you became, you said you're just good with numbers. Obviously, like, really competitive.
Yeah.
You just like to kind of just do really well. So, I'm just curious about this kind of number monster winner and how she came to be.
Yeah. Sorry, I always... I think numbers are like logical, like there's a clear kind of rule-based kind of system to how they work, and so it just felt easy for me. But I equally had no idea like how the world of finance works, so it wasn't as a particular career that I was drawn to. I went into university being like, I'm just going to do all the papers that are to do with like numbers and see if something comes of it. And then when I was at university, there's probably friends who were like, actually these are the like interesting jobs and investment banking and things like that, because actually that is one thing I knew in the world of finance. You kind of have the listed world, which is the stock market, so people who go and like trade shares, and that's much more, I wouldn't say it's like gambling, but it's much more kind of picking trends and high intense short-term working where you're trying to trade the market. Or there's the unlisted kind of private world, which is where you're buying actual single big companies, like a big water company. So it's much more long-term. And I already got an inclination that actually I preferred the slower moving versus, the kind of intensity and the higher risk side of it didn't appeal. But I completely by accident fell into actually doing investment banking jobs because someone just said, yeah, you'd be good at it, you should do it.
Who was that? They had quite a profound impact.
I know.
You should just do it. Okay.
And then when I moved to London, I thought I want to get out of investment banking. I don't want to work for Goldman's. And they said we could move you up to London, but I have friends who were literally working 51 or 52 weeks a year in the office. And I was like, if I move to London and work for you, I will literally see the Goldman's office and nothing else. So I knew that wasn't me. But again, just following someone else's advice on what I should do with my career, the guy who ran Goldman said, you're actually really good with people as well, and maybe you're someone who shouldn't just live behind a computer for the rest of your life. And so that's how, when I landed in London, I was like, okay, I'm going to try and look for a job that's in this area.
I was interested, not that you didn't answer that question well, but I was interested actually mostly
The
time before, like early childhood.
Well, no, that's what I was going to say. So then when I'm reflecting on if I want to stay in finance or not, I go back to how did I actually end up in it. I'm like, gosh, often it's been people telling me to
do stuff.
do stuff, you know, and have I ended up here purely because I've been doing what other people have said rather than what I like myself. And actually I asked my mum, because I was like, how did I end up doing math subject at school? And she was like, you used to have this nerdy little computer thing that you had to do equations on and you just loved it from an early age. And I did, you know, and I really...
What was it? What
I do
kind of thing
remember
was
it. Mum said if I ever got any of the maths questions wrong, I'd reset the whole machine so I could do it again and get like 100%. And I'm like, that's like, to your point about perfection.
So you were training early. You were training early. But obviously you were just really good at that. Right?
Yeah. And you know, like I think the thing that I have enjoyed this year is I've always thought, when as a result, I'm not creative at all. And I've just thought, well, that's just not one of my abilities. But this year I've kind of been trying to lean into, like, it doesn't have to be all about the, you know, the numbers.
Doesn't have to be all about the numbers. That should be on your something.
Tattoo.
Yeah,
I've been thinking of like a tattoo to remind myself to stay grounded.
Exactly.
Maybe that's it.
That's a good one to remember. I like that. I feel like it's a funny one, isn't it? Where sometimes it's such a curse to be just naturally good at something. It doesn't mean you're not good at other stuff.
Yeah.
It just means you just didn't do it.
Yeah.
But actually, there's a whole world in you that isn't that, right?
Yeah.
The same goes with anybody. Really.
Exactly.
Do you think on the flip side, can so-called creative people get into numbers more? Have I ignored my numbers side?
Funny enough, like one of the things that I've been driving a lot through our foundation is like social mobility and encouraging more people into the finance industry from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And I say that to a lot of the students, is like some of the best people I've hired haven't done degrees at university that anything to do with numbers. They just have a ability to think with a little bit of curiosity and who you
So you reckon I could do it?
Easily. Half of it's been able to just talk to people. You've clearly got that gift.
I could be an investment banker.
Yeah.
I didn't realise.
No, but people don't realise.
Yeah.
They're like, it's not as hard as I think people within the industry make it out to be. And therefore it does keep it quite exclusive. Yeah.
I'm still really intrigued about, maybe the answer to this is very boring, but I want to know anyway. Like, what is your day made up? Like, how does it, like, what is it?
Yes. Like, what do you actually do with your day?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that a weird question?
So it depends. You know, I kind of talked about we get money off people and then we put it into businesses.
Yeah.
So someone like myself will be much more being on planes, going out talking to investors around the world who manage billions in capital and saying, we think that you should invest in the UK or in Europe, you know, and convince them to kind of think to allocate you 100 million. And then I will go to the investment team, and that's a large part of the finance industry, and they will be sitting there saying, what are really good businesses that are stable and safe that we could put that money into? So whereas my life is more outward facing and actually talking to people these days, a lot of their life will be sitting with an Excel model and saying, okay, what do we think will happen with that business? How do we forecast the revenues of that business? And try and come up with a value, and therefore we should buy it for this price and we can make heaps of money when we sell it in 10 years' time. And look at all different types of businesses and work out, you know, what's a good buy right now and things like that.
Okay, so you've got to persuade people to give them a load of money.
Yeah.
What would be your, because everyone needs, including my children, you know, everyone needs to persuade people to give them money at some point.
Yeah.
You know, you just do hundreds of millions, but people might just do a tenner, do you know what I mean, a pound. Do you know what I mean, for a chocolate bar, like, you know. You know, what are your kind of top 3 tips to persuade people to give you money? As someone who does it relentlessly in the high echelons of money. Because surely it's the same tactics,
I think the first one is, you know, come across as like, professional and credible. You know, show up in a certain way, ask for things in a kind of clear,
this is good.
Articulate.
So if I was telling a child this, like, look credible, don't just be whining about it, just look good, dress well. Come with a plan.
Yeah, well then that's going to say the next one is just be really clear. You know,
Nice. I need it for this to get this, and you'll get this.
Exactly. I've
Very
got a
good.
friend who does actually have a lot of wealth, so their kids, rather than them expecting they get anything, they have to write a PowerPoint presentation and make an actual business case for why they
Nice.
deserve anything that they
Nice.
get from their parents.
Yeah.
And so I think it is that it's like actually like genuinely be able to make a case. And then I do think the last one comes to actually just be like a likable and authentic person. You know, coming to that point, I think people don't want to feel like they're being sold or they're having
Sure.
like their wool pulled over their eyes. And so I think the more you can just build a genuine relationship, it's trust. Do you actually trust that person to look after your money?
Yeah.
That is the bit that ultimately I think unlocks, a relationship.
When do you say the bit like in the chat? When do you go, so we're thinking 100 million?
I don't. Some
Well,
people
you-
would
oh,
say
right.
that, whereas I just
Right,
sit there and let them tell me what they're thinking.
Oh, I see.
That's me. I'm not a push.
Oh, I see,
person.
cool.
Yeah.
So they will tell you, we've got
Yeah,
X amount.
exactly.
And you say, yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
And also, you probably wouldn't push it on your first, your first date.
On your first date. I would just go straight in, 100 million.
You'll probably
Just
build
write
the
it.
relationship and the
I'll write it
trust
on a piece of
before
paper
you
and
go
you
to how much
slide it
money
over.
can I have from you.
You mentioned your friends who has loads of money.
Yeah.
Their kids have to do PowerPoint
Yeah.
and stuff. How do you want to play it with your 5-year-old?
I think it's probably one of the biggest concerns of my husband and I. Like, we talk about it the most. Like, you worry about, I guess, privilege, and it's basically not being spoiled.
Yeah.
At the moment, you realise actually he has no desire for material things, which is great. And so I think more at the moment, our conversation is how do we make sure it stays like this, that he isn't attaching to things. But it is hard because kids see things that they want and they're always wanting them. And so we're trying to work out how we just don't give him everything he wants. You're probably much more experienced in this and kind of can give me advice in it. What he doesn't like is like mummy going off to work or mum and dad being at work. And so actually explaining to them that the more you kind of buy and spend, the more you have to work. And there's kind of a relationship between the two. And actually this year having lots of time together, it has been good for that. It's less, it's more about actually just having quality time. So I feel like, there's been less focus on things. But, they don't want things ultimately. They just want your presence and your focus. Doesn't involve.
So he doesn't want you to go back to work?
No. But not working is not an option.
Yeah.
So
Can you just work like 3 days a week? Do you have to work the whole time?
at the
Hello, dog.
moment,
Hello. It's all right.
oh, you've got
Oh,
food.
drag the
haven't
bag.
Come on, you little shit. Sorry.
you? There is.
Not that little.
I think in time that would be ideal. I think at the moment he's at school. I can work when he's at school.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
of
don't
course.
feel like I'm compromised in terms
Sure.
of not seeing him. I think it's the the intensity of the work outside of his school hours or the travel that's the bit where you would feel
Yeah.
compromised.
I'm very intrigued about what very intrigued about you going back into this work will mean, because I just think like you seem to have, you're going back into it with like a very, very heightened sense of awareness
Yeah.
and quite a changed person.
So am I. Well, that's why I sat down on this bench to just muse for a while.
you're going to be around the same, the same kind of people you were around before. I feel like stuff's going to happen. Like it's going to be some kind of, there must be some clash there, and that's going to be quite
Yeah.
interesting.
It will be. Hopefully, where I'm joining it won't be like that. But I think in the wider industry, definitely, I'll naturally be, kind of surrounded by a lot of people who just are operating on a different frequency. And it works for them, but it's not where I am. And so I think that is going to be the interesting thing, is like, how much have I changed that, yeah.
Did you say you've had surgery, or you about to have it?
Yeah, I've had several operations, yeah.
How have they been?
Because my cancer was found early and it was very localised, I haven't had to go through chemo and the things which I know more like knock your body around long term. So actually, I've seen the fact that they could just surgically, operate, which is essentially meant a double mastectomy, as like a positive thing, because it's something that actually yes, it's removing something, but it's not an organ that I need, so it doesn't impact me kind of long term.
Yeah.
And the recovery is about 6 weeks. You know, it's not in the scheme of my life, me being knocked around for years and years after having to have like drugs pumped through my body and things. So yeah, even that I felt kind of lucky in a way that was my, you know, and it never felt traumatic for me. Like actually my best friend who was with me when I got diagnosed said my instinct, as soon as the doctor said to me, it's cancer about the lump, I was like, okay, cool, so what do? Do we just cut my breasts off? And she was like, that's literally what you said back to her, even though at the point we didn't know what was going to be the part. She was like, it's kind of like, you know, that felt like the easiest kind of, you know, thing for me. And so, yeah, so you have to have several surgeries where they kind of remove, and then I have one more surgery where they essentially reconstruct. Yeah.
What, I mean, what's the experience like of going from, you know, having breasts then to no breasts, and then obviously you haven't had reconstruction yet?
No, but what they do is I learned a lot about breast reconstruction. They put these things in called inflators, and they slowly over like 2 months inflate you back up to your normal size. So that's where I am now, to then have proper kind of implants put in. So the experience of like not having breasts, I think if I had gone from breast to being completely flat until now, would probably have felt strange over summer, but actually my breasts have never been kind of part of my identity. And also when you're in this period of time where you literally think, am I going to be here to see my son grow up?
Yeah, you just don't.
You're kind of like take a limb to like let me like have this life. And so it was a really easy decision in that sense. And also for me it just felt like once actually it was done and the cancer was gone, mentally the anxiety about could this be growing, could it be spreading, went with it. That's when I felt my mind suddenly went quiet and was like, okay, now I can kind of rebuild from here, and it's gone and I'm kind of free.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
So they also inflate them back up. I'm just confused about how that works.
It's strange.
So
there is like, I can feel valves, and they literally will just put a needle in, and every few days or weeks they just inject more and more liquid back into you to kind of, and then the funny thing is you start having these conversations with surgeons, and they're like, well, do you want to go to like double D? And I'm like, definitely, like, you know, like he said, like most women will actually choose to then go up a bit, like when they're having reconstruction. For me, actually, in terms of feeling like myself, I was like, no, it's quite important for me that I go back to being the same size that I was.
Yeah, that makes sense. Penultimate question for you. What's the most beautiful thing you've seen out and about on your walks recently?
I've become really obsessed with light. You know, like, and I think it's going slower and just seeing things that I previously would have been on my phone and walking past and not seeing them. Recently it's been, you know, like if I'm swimming or in the ponds or at the Lido and you see like the light in the water, like, and just noticing things I hadn't noticed before. But actually when I was walking the other day and it had been raining, and I just suddenly saw all of these spider webs and the light was coming through them. And it just felt like another reminder to slow down, which is the more I slow down, the more I actually often see. So that would probably be the one that came straight to mind.
Oh, that's a very nice one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, no, thanks for stopping.
Last question. You can either answer this in a now kind of way or a future kind of way. However you want to do it, it's up to you, or both. What are you going to do next?
I'm going to go off, be slow, finishing my walk, and then try and bring that out of the heath into my life as well, and just go forward in a really slow way and just be.
Great. Well, very best of luck to you.
Thanks.
I used to hate Mondays. I was moving too fast. Never took notice of the world as it passed. Not the glimmering water, above the riverbed, or the light on the silk song, a spider web. I was chasing a feeling, obtaining my worth through numbers and figures, depleted reserves. Took a boat from the blue to see none of it works without who we are when we land on this earth. 'Cause we are who we are when we land on this earth. We are who we are, who we are. No, I don't hate Mondays, spend them watching the trees, trying to move more at that frequency, finding a rhythm here in